London in the early 1600s was a city of contradictions. It was the rising capital of a global empire, yet it remained trapped in a medieval shell. With a population exploding toward 500,000 people, it was a sprawling labyrinth of timber and plaster, a claustrophobic maze where the rich rubbed shoulders with the destitute. If you could step out of a time machine and walk these streets today, the first thing that would hit you is not the sight, but the smell. The sharp sting of sea coal smoke mixing with the stench of open drains, unwashed bodies, and the rotting refuse of a metropolis that had grown too fast for its own good. But through the haze of smoke and fog there was an undeniable beauty, a chaotic energy that defined the spirit of the city. This was a world of wooden canyons, where houses leaned in toward each other across narrow alleys, so close that neighbors on upper floors could almost shake hands across the street. In this video, we are using advanced AI technology to peel back the layers of time, reconstructing the lost city of London exactly as it appeared before the great catastrophes that would wipe it from the map. Our journey begins at the most iconic structure of the age, the Old London Bridge. For over 600 years, this was the only way to cross the Thames on foot. But to call it a bridge is a massive understatement. It was a living, breathing city, floating above the water. Imagine a street built on top of a dam. The bridge was barely 20 feet wide, yet it was packed with buildings up to 7 stories high. These were not just facades, they were homes, shops, and workshops. As we move closer, look at the details. The ground floors were filled with shop fronts, haberdashers selling cloth pin makers, apothecaries, and booksellers. Above them, families lived their lives suspended over the rushing river. The noise would have been overwhelming. The rumble of wooden cartwheels on stone, the shouting of traders, and the constant roar of the water below. Because the bridge was supported by 19 massive stone arches encased in protective timber pilings, the flow of the river was restricted. This created a dam effect, causing the water to rush through the narrow gaps with terrifying force. Locals called it shooting the bridge. Brave or perhaps foolish watermen would try to steer their small boats through these rapids. Many succeeded, but many others drowned, their bodies swept away by the merciless current. Dominating the center of the bridge stood the Nonsuch House, a 4-story miracle of Elizabethan engineering brought piece by piece from Holland and reassembled here without a single iron nail. It was a splash of color and architectural vanity in a city of brown and gray. But the bridge had a darker side. At the southern entrance stood the stone gate. If you look up, you will see the grisly spikes where the heads of traitors were displayed. Dipped in tar to preserve them against the weather and the birds, these severed heads stared down at every traveler entering the city, a brutal reminder of the absolute power of the crown. Let us drift away from the bridge and onto the River Thames itself. In the 17th century, the river was cleaner than in later industrial years, but it was far busier. This was the main highway of London. The streets were often gridlocked with carts or too narrow for carriages, so if you wanted to get somewhere fast, you took a boat. The river was thick with wherries, the water taxis of the day, ferrying noblemen, merchants, and actors between the city and the entertainment districts of Suffolk. It was a lifeline connecting London to the world. Tall ships from the East Indies, from the Americas, and from the Mediterranean anchored in the Pool of London, their masts creating a forest of wood and rope, offloading spices, silks, tobacco, and sugar. In the winter of certain years, the Thames would freeze over completely. These were the times of the frost fairs. The ice became a fairground. Tents were set up, roasting oxen on open fires. People skated, played football, and even operated printing presses on the frozen river. It was a moment of magical suspension, where the terrifying power of nature became a playground for the citizens. Flowing upstream past the smoke of the city, we arrive at a place of stark contrast, the Palace of Whitehall. While the city was cramped and dirty, Whitehall was vast and sprawling. Stretching along the riverbank, it was the largest palace in Europe, bigger even than the Vatican. This was the headquarters of the Stuart monarchy. Under King Charles II, the restored king, the palace was a hive of activity. It was not a single unified building, but a chaotic collection of halls, courtyards, and apartments built over centuries. Here, the air was perfumed. Courtiers in extravagant French fashions strolled through the Privy Garden. Spaniels raced across the manicured lawns, and the sound of lute music drifted from open windows. At the center of it all stood the banqueting house, designed by Inigo Jones, a masterpiece of classical architecture that seemed to have dropped from the sky into Tudor London. Inside, beneath a ceiling painted by Rubens, kings were treated like gods dining in splendor, while just a few miles away, the poor fought for survival in the mud. But even here, among the silk and the gold, the shadow of the city loomed. The palace was not an island. It was connected to the same river that carried the city's waste. And as the 1660s progressed, a sense of impending doom began to settle over the capital. The heat was rising, the timber was drying, and the stage was being set for a tragedy that would end this golden age forever. If Whitehall was the face of royal pleasure, the Tower of London was the face of royal fear. Drifting back downriver past the bridge, we encounter this brooding fortress. By the mid-1600s, the White Tower had already stood watch over the city for nearly 6 centuries. It was a place of dread, its grey stone walls rising sheer from the water's edge were the last thing many condemned souls ever saw. Prisoners accused of high treason entered through the Traitor's Gate beneath Street, Thomas's Tower, where the tide washed against the mossy steps. Within these walls lay a complex world of its own, not just a prison, but the royal mint where coins were struck, and the royal armories housing the weapons of war. It was a symbol of the unyielding permanence of the state amidst a city of fragile wood. Moving inland away from the river, we enter the commercial heart of the capital, Cheapside. This broad avenue was the showpiece of the City of London. Unlike the twisting alleyways that fed into it, Cheapside was wide, paved, and lined with the tall gabled houses of the wealthiest merchants. This was the Wall Street of the 17th century, but infinitely more colourful. Goldsmiths displayed glittering wares in open windows. Mercers unrolled fine velvets, and the air was thick with the shouts of apprentices, crying out, "What do you lack? What do you lack?" Dominating this scene, and indeed the entire skyline of London, was Old St. Paul's Cathedral. It is difficult for us to grasp the sheer scale of this building. It was one of the largest Gothic cathedrals ever built, longer and taller than the current dome that replaced it. But by the 1600s, it was a dying giant. The great spire had been struck by lightning years before and never replaced, leaving a flat stump of a tower. The stone was crumbling, the stained glass was broken, and the nave, the sacred central aisle, had been desecrated by commerce. It was known as Paul's Walk. Here, Amidst the soaring Gothic arches, horses were led through as a shortcut, servants were hired, and business deals were struck. It was a marketplace in the guise of a church, a reflection of a city that had placed profit above piety. But the bustling energy of the 1660s concealed a terrifying fragility. In 1665, a silent killer stalked these streets, the Great Plague. The crowded, unsanitary conditions turned London into a necropolis. Red crosses were painted on doors with the words, "Lord, have mercy upon us." The streets fell silent, save for the rumbling of the dead carts and the cry of, "Bring out your dead." Grass began to grow between the cobblestones of Cheapside. Although the plague subsided by 1666, it left the population traumatized and the city's economy fragile. And then came the fire. September 1666. The summer had been exceptionally hot and dry. The timber-framed houses, coated in pitch and tar, were essentially kindling, waiting for a spark. That spark came in the early hours of Sunday morning in a baker's shop on Pudding Lane. At first it seemed insignificant. Fires were common in London, but a strong easterly wind fanned the flames, pushing the inferno west into the heart of the city. The reconstruction you are seeing now shows the terrifying speed of the destruction. The fire didn't just burn, it roared. It created its own weather system, sucking in oxygen and generating heat so intense that stone exploded and iron melted. Residents fled in panic, clogging the narrow streets, with carts carrying their meager possessions, while the rich scrambled to hire boats on the river. The noise was apocalyptic, the cracking of timber, the thunder of collapsing buildings, and the screaming of the wind. For 4 days and nights the fire raged. It consumed everything in its path. The Royal Exchange, the Guildhall, and thousands of homes vanished. The most heartbreaking sight was the fall of street pools. The scaffolding around the cathedral caught fire, acting as a ladder for the flames to reach the roof. The lead sheeting on the roof melted, pouring down the streets like volcanic lava. Finally, with an earth-shaking crash, the roof collapsed and the great cathedral was gutted, leaving only a shell of blackened stone pointing accusingly at the smoke-filled sky. When the smoke finally cleared, 4/5 of the city inside, the walls had been destroyed. Over 13,000 houses were gone. 87 churches were ruins. The medieval city of London, the city of Chaucer, of Shakespeare, of history, was effectively wiped from the face of the earth. Yet from these ashes, a new London would rise. The chaotic wooden city was gone, replaced by a city of brick and stone, with wider streets and a new sense of order. The London we know today is built on the bones of this lost world. As we look back at these images, we are reminded that cities, like people, are fragile. They live, they die, and they are reborn. This AI reconstruction is our tribute to that lost metropolis, a chance to walk its streets one last time, to hear its echoes, and to remember the vibrant, chaotic, and magnificent life that once thrived here. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the past.